The first thing I remember is the sound. Not the fire itself, but the crack, like the world splitting open. Then the smell smoke and burnt paint, thick enough to choke, and through all of it I stood barefoot in the yard, clutching the only thing I'd managed to grab, my late husband's old photo frame, the glass hot against my palm. That night, as the flames swallowed 30 years of my life, I didn't cry, not once. I just stood there, listening to the firefighters shouting, watching the windows burst one by one like fireworks for a celebration I hadn't been invited to. When it was finally over, the chief came to me, his face gray with soot. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm sorry, we couldn't save much." I nodded. What was there to save? The house was gone. The kitchen, where I'd made Sunday pancakes for my son, the porch where my husband used to read his newspaper every morning, the little sewing corner I called my world ashes, all of it. By dawn, the fire trucks were gone, and I stood alone in the cold light, staring at the blackened skeleton of my home. I didn't know where to go. My husband, Henry, had passed 5 years ago. My son, Mark, lived 2 towns over. We hadn't spoken much lately. Not since he got married. But that morning, with the smoke still clinging to my clothes, I told myself, he's my boy. He won't let me sleep on the street. So I packed what little I could salvage, a half-burned photo album, my husband's watch, and a change of clothes from the trunk of my car, and started driving toward my son's house. Before the fire, my life was quiet, simple. I liked it that way. I lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by oak trees and memories. Every morning, I'd open my kitchen window and listen to the birds. I'd make a cup of coffee in my blue ceramic mug, the one Henry had chipped years ago, and sit by the window, watching the light creep across the table. Mark used to tease me about how little I needed. "Mom, you should get out more," he'd say, laughing as he fixed something around the house. "You're turning into one of those old ladies who talk to their plants." And maybe I was, but those plants never talked back with judgment in their voice. Mark had been a good son once, thoughtful, gentle, always calling to check in after Henry died. Then came Emily. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. A sharp smile, glossy hair, and a perfume that lingered in the air long after she'd left a room. But she had a way of making me feel small. From the start, I sensed she didn't like me. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I reminded her that Mark had a life before her. The last time I'd been to their house was for Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. I remember how tense it felt. Emily had decorated everything to perfection: white tablecloth, candles, a turkey that looked like something out of a magazine, but the air was stiff. When I offered to help in the kitchen, she smiled that tight smile of hers and said, "Oh, don't worry, Mrs. Carter. I've got it all under control." Mrs. Carter. Not Mom, not even Linda. After dinner, Mark had pulled me aside and asked me not to make things awkward. I remember standing there, holding my coat, the words sitting in my chest like stones. I drove home that night in silence. Since then, our calls had become fewer, our visits shorter. I told myself he was busy, that's all. New house, new marriage, new responsibilities. But deep down, I knew it wasn't time keeping him away. It was her. Still, as I drove toward their house after the fire, I tried to push those thoughts aside. "He's your son," I kept telling myself. "He'll open his door, he'll hug you, and everything will be okay." The road to Mark's neighborhood wound through fields and sleepy little stores, the kind that sold homemade pies and secondhand books. I'd driven that road countless times before, but that morning it felt different, empty. Every mile between me and my home, what was left of it, felt heavier. When I pulled up in front of Mark's house, it looked just as perfect as I remembered. White siding, trimmed hedges, a little welcome mat at the door. Emily's touch was everywhere. I sat in the car for a long time before knocking. I must have rehearsed what to say a dozen times. There was a fire. I lost everything. I just need a place for a while, but when the door opened, all I could manage was, "Hi, sweetheart." Emily stood there, still in her robe, her hair tied back neatly. Her smile faltered when she saw me. "Linda?" she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" There was a fire, I stammered. The house, my house, it's gone. I didn't know where else to go. Her eyes widened for a second, then softened into something that looked almost like sympathy, but not quite. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Come in, come in. She stepped aside, and I entered their spotless living room, careful not to drip ash or dirt on her cream-colored rug. Mark came down the stairs a minute later, his eyes bleary from sleep. Mom? He said, voice thick with surprise. What happened? When I told him, he put a hand on my shoulder. Thank God you're okay, he said. You can stay here for now, we'll figure things out. And for the first time that night, I let myself breathe. I thought maybe everything will be all right after all. But I didn't know then that the hardest part hadn't even begun. The first night at Mark's house was quiet, too quiet. I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of their refrigerator and the soft creak of pipes behind the walls. The bed was soft, cleaner than anything I'd slept on in years. But I couldn't rest. My whole body still smelled faintly of smoke. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fire again, the orange glow swallowing the curtains, the way the photo frames on the mantel melted into nothing. I could almost hear Henry's voice in my head, calm and steady. We built that home with our hands, Lynn. Don't let anyone take it from you. But it was gone. The next morning, Emily made breakfast eggs, toast, and coffee. She was polite, efficient, and cold in a way that didn't need words. She placed my plate on the table, smiled thinly, and said, I know it must be hard, Linda, but I'm sure your insurance will cover the damages soon. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, I'm hoping so. Mark sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. We'll help you figure out the paperwork, Mom. It might take a while, though. I appreciate that, I said softly. For a while we ate in silence. The ticking clock over the dining room door was the only sound. I glanced around the room, family pictures on the wall, mostly of their vacations. Emily in sunglasses, Mark smiling beside her, the ocean in the background. Not one photo of me or Henry, not even the wedding picture I'd framed for them years ago. After breakfast, I offered to wash the dishes, but Emily waved me off. No, really, it's fine, she said. You're our guest. Guest? It should have comforted me, but instead the word made my chest tighten. For the next few days, I tried to be helpful. I folded laundry, made dinner one evening, even tended the flowers in their backyard. But slowly, I started noticing little things, small, almost invisible cracks in the kindness Emily showed. One afternoon, as I was setting the table, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. She can't stay forever, Mark, Emily whispered. I know, he sighed. But what do you want me to do? She lost her house. I get that. But we have a routine. You work long hours and I just can't take care of her too. I'm not asking you to take care of her, he said, his tone tightening. She's my mother. There was a long pause. Then Emily said quietly, She's your mother, not mine. I stood there holding the silverware, staring at my reflection in the spoons. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced myself to breathe. When dinner came, they smiled and talked like nothing happened. Mark asked me about the insurance claim. Emily complimented the mashed potatoes I'd odd. I smiled back, pretending I hadn't heard a word. But that night, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered into the dark, Henry, I think your son's wife wants me gone. Over the next week, I noticed more changes. Emily stopped inviting me to sit in the living room when they watched TV. She began forgetting to tell me about meals once I came downstairs at 8, only to find them finishing dinner without me. Oh, I thought you were resting, she'd said with a too sweet tone. And Mark? He tried. I could see it in his eyes. But every time he reached out to include me, she'd find a way to steer him back. One morning, I made pancakes the way I used to when Mark was little. I was proud of them. Fluffy, golden, just right. When they came down, I smiled and said, Breakfast's ready? Emily's face fell slightly. Oh, we were just about to head out. There's this brunch spot downtown we've been wanting to try. Mark hesitated. Mom made pancakes, he said, glancing at me. Emily's voice softened, but her words were sharp. We can go next weekend, honey. It's okay. She'll understand. And of course, I said, of course. Go ahead. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table with 3 untouched plates of pancakes and a house so quiet it hurt. I told myself not to take it personally. She's young. She wants her own space. But deep down, it wasn't just space she wanted, it was my absence. That evening, when they returned, I was sitting outside on the porch, watching the sun sink low behind the rooftops. Mark came over, sat beside me, and sighed. "You okay, Mom?" I nodded, though I wasn't. "I'm fine, sweetheart." He looked tired. "Emily's just adjusting. It's been a stressful week." "I know," I said. "It's been stressful for all of us." He reached out and squeezed my hand. "I promise we'll figure this out." I wanted to believe him, I really did, but as the days went by, that promise began to sound more like a hope than a plan. Then one night, everything shifted. I was in the hallway, heading to the bathroom, when I heard them talking again, voices low but tense. Emily said, "We can't keep paying for everything, Mark. Your mom's insurance might take months. What if it doesn't even cover enough? What if she expects to move in permanently?" Mark's voice dropped. "She doesn't expect that." "How do you know? She's my mother. She wouldn't do that. She's already here," Emily shot back. "And she's making herself comfortable. Did you see her going through the mail this morning?" "I don't like it. I feel like a stranger in my own house." I stepped back into the guest room, my heart pounding. I hadn't meant to go through the mail. I'd just been looking for my insurance documents. But in that moment, it didn't matter. They were talking about me like I was a burden, like I was some old woman they didn't know what to do with. I sat on the edge of the bed, tears filling my eyes. I'd lost my home, my husband, and now, slowly, I was losing my son too. The next morning, the air in the house felt colder, though it was the middle of June. I moved quietly, not wanting to disturb anyone, and found myself back in the kitchen, making coffee just for me this time. The smell reminded me of my old home, how the aroma used to drift through the rooms, how Henry would joke that it was my morning perfume. Now, standing in someone else's kitchen, I felt like a guest in my own son's life. When Mark came down, he looked distracted. His tie was crooked, his hair uncombed. I poured him a cup of coffee like I always used to. "Here," I said softly, sliding it across the counter. He smiled weakly. "Thanks, Mom." "You okay?" I asked. He hesitated before answering. "Just a lot on my mind. Work stuff." But I knew that tone, half truth, half avoidance. "Mark," I said gently, "I can tell when something's bothering you. You've been quiet lately." He took a long sip, then sighed. "It's just, Emily's been stressed. She feels like there's no space for us to breathe. I told her it's temporary, but she's worried about money," and I stopped, him with a small nod. "It's okay," I said. "I understand." He frowned. "You don't have to," but I did. I understood far too well. That day, I decided to visit the remains of my house. Maybe it was foolish, but I needed to see it to remind myself I wasn't always this displaced. When I got there, the air was thick with the scent of ash and damp earth. The firemen had cordoned off most of it, but I managed to step through the back gate. The ground crunched under my shoes, bits of charred wood and glass glinting in the sunlight. I walked where the living room used to be, where Henry's recliner had stood by the window. It was gone, just a melted metal frame now. The kitchen was nothing but blackened tiles. But near the corner by what used to be the hallway, I found something. My wedding ring. I'd taken it off months ago because it had gotten too tight. It must have been on the dresser. When I picked it up, it was warm from the sun, and I don't know why, but I pressed it against my lips. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Mrs. Carter?" I turned. It was Tom, our old neighbor. He looked startled to see me. "I thought you might come back." "Here," he said, stepping carefully over debris. "They said it was an electrical short. Started in the attic, spread fast." I nodded slowly. I figured as much. He hesitated, then added, "If you ever need help rebuilding, my brother-in-law's a contractor. I could get you a good rate." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it." But the truth was, I didn't even know if I could afford to rebuild. When I returned to Mark's house later that day, Emily was in the living room, on her laptop. She barely looked up when I came in. "Long day?" she asked. "I went to see the house," I said quietly. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. "Oh, how was it?" Gone, I said simply, all of it. She looked uncomfortable, as if my grief was something she didn't know how to handle. Well, at least you're safe, she said after a moment. That's what matters. I nodded, even though her words felt hollow. That evening, Mark came home late. I heard them arguing softly in the kitchen, Emily's voice sharp, his low and weary. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. When I walked in, they both fell silent. Emily forced a smile. We were just talking about finances. Mark rubbed his temples. Yeah. Things are a little tight this month. I stepped closer. Mark, I said gently, I don't want to be a burden. You're not, he said quickly, too quickly. Emily looked down, saying nothing. I can find somewhere else, I continued, maybe a motel for a while, until the insurance comes through. Mark's eyes widened. No, Mom, you don't have to do that. Emily's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to speak, but she didn't. I smiled faintly. It's all right. Just think about it, okay? Then I went upstairs, closed my door, and finally let the tears fall. The next morning I woke up early. I could hear them downstairs, talking quietly again. Something in Emily's tone made my stomach knot. I waited until she left for work, then went into the kitchen to find Mark alone, staring into his coffee. Mark, I said, sitting across from him, can I ask you something? He looked up, tired. Of course. If it were your father sitting here instead of me, if he'd lost everything, would you be having this conversation about space and money? He froze, eyes lowering to the table. I need to know if the man we raised still has a heart that remembers family, I said softly, because I raised you to stand by the people you love, not turn away when it's inconvenient. He swallowed hard. Mom, please don't make this harder. I'm not trying to make it harder, I said. I'm trying to make you remember. He didn't respond, just stared at his cup, his jaw tightening, and right then, I realized something painful. I was losing him not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't know how to stand up to her. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of that same kitchen clock. In that silence, I made a decision. If Emily wanted me gone, maybe it was time to give her exactly what she wanted. I woke up before sunrise the next morning. The world outside was quiet, just a thin veil of fog hanging over the front lawn and the faint whistle of a train in the distance. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, hands folded, staring at the packed suitcase I'd placed by the door the night before. It wasn't much. A few clothes, Henry's watch, the photo album that survived the fire, and the wedding ring I'd found in the ashes. Everything else I'd ever owned was gone. I thought about leaving without a word, but something inside me, something motherly, refused to go like a thief in the night. My son deserved to know why I was leaving. When I went downstairs, Mark was already up, pouring cereal into a bowl. He looked surprised to see me dressed, shoes on. Mom, you're up early. I am, I said, my voice calm, too calm. Mark, can we talk for a minute? He set the cereal box down, immediately sensing something in my tone. Sure. I motioned toward the kitchen table, the same table where I'd sat every morning since the fire, trying to make myself small enough to fit into their life. I took a deep breath. I'm going to leave today. His brow furrowed. What? Why? It's time, I said gently. You've done enough for me, and I don't want to be in the way any longer. You're not in the way, he insisted, though his voice cracked at the edges. I smiled faintly. Mark, sweetheart, I've been your mother long enough to know when someone's forcing a smile for my sake. He opened his mouth to protest, but I lifted my hand to stop him. I know Emily's been kind, in her own way, I said carefully, but this house isn't mine. It's hers. And you belong here with her, not worrying about me in the next room. He looked down, his throat tightening. Mom, she just needs time. Things have been stressful. Maybe, I said. But I also need peace, Mark, and I can't find it here. There was a long silence. I could see the conflict in his face, the pull between love and loyalty, between his mother and his wife. Finally, he said quietly, Where will you go? I'll figure it out, I replied. Maybe a motel near town for a while, until I know what the insurance will cover. Don't worry about me. But he did worry. He always had that boyish, helpless look when he didn't know how to fix something. Before he could answer, Emily came downstairs, her hair wrapped in a towel, coffee in hand. When she saw the suitcase, she froze. "What's going on?" she asked. "I'm leaving," I said simply. Her eyes flickered shock, then something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe. Leaving, but where will you go? I smiled softly. "Don't worry, dear, I'll manage." Mark looked between us, his voice low. "Mom, at least stay until the insurance people call. You don't have to rush." But I shook my head. "It's better this way." Emily set her cup down on the counter, her expression composed. "Well, if that's what you think is best," she said. I nodded, picking up my suitcase. When I hugged Mark goodbye, he held me longer than I expected. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I closed my eyes. "I know, baby, I know," and then I left. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old air freshener. The carpet was thin, the walls beige, but it was quiet. Peaceful in a way. I spent my days on the phone with the insurance company, trying to piece together what was left of my life. They said the claim could take months. I didn't have that kind of money, but I tried not to think about it too much. Every night I'd look at Henry's watch sitting on the nightstand, ticking softly. Sometimes I'd talk to him, like I used to when he was alive. "You'd tell me not to cry," I whispered one night. "But I can't help it, Henry. I feel so small." A week passed before I heard from Mark again. He called late one evening. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice heavy. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. There was a pause. "Emily feels terrible about how things went," he continued. I didn't believe that for a second, but I didn't say so. "Tell her I appreciate her concern." He sighed. "I've been thinking maybe I should have insisted you stay longer. I just didn't want to make things worse." "I know," I said softly. "You're doing your best, Mark. That's all I ever wanted from you." He was quiet again. "Then, Mom, I'll help you rebuild. We'll figure it out together." Something in his voice told me he meant it. "Thank you," I whispered. "That means more than you know." After we hung up, I sat there in the dim motel light, holding the phone in my lap. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe there was still a little bit of my boy left under all that distance. But a few days later, that hope cracked again. I was coming back to the motel after meeting the insurance adjuster when I stopped at a grocery store. As I waited in line, I overheard two women behind me talking. "Did you hear about the Carters?" one of them said. "Their house burned down last month." My ears perked up. "Yeah," the other replied. "Mark and Emily Carter. I think his mom's been living with them, poor woman. But I heard Emily's been telling people she's not coming back." "Really?" the first woman said. "That's awful." Apparently she said it's too much having her mother-in-law there, said she's needy and old-fashioned. The cashier called for the next customer, but I stood frozen, staring at the items in my basket. Cereal, milk, a small jar of jam. My throat felt tight. I couldn't move. They were talking about me. Emily had told people I wasn't coming back, not because I'd chosen to leave, but because she didn't want me to. I paid for my groceries and walked out slowly, my mind buzzing. It wasn't the gossip that hurt. It was the confirmation of what I already knew deep down. I had been pushed out of my own family's life. But as I sat in my car, staring out at the empty parking lot, I made a promise to myself. If she thought I was done, if she thought she could erase me that easily, she was wrong. The next morning, I woke up before dawn again. It was becoming a habit my mind wouldn't let me rest. I kept replaying those women's words in my head. Needy, old-fashioned, the way they'd said it like I was some pitiful stray who'd overstayed her welcome. I sat at the small motel desk with a notepad and pen, trying to make sense of my next steps. The insurance agent had said they were still reviewing the claim, which I now understood was another way of saying, don't expect anything soon. I had about $300 left in my checking account. The motel cost $65 a night. I did the math and exhaled slowly. I couldn't last long like this. That's when I remembered Tom's offer, my old neighbor, the one who'd mentioned his brother-in-law was a contractor. I still had his number written down in my purse. I called him that morning. "Tom, it's Linda Carter," I said. He sounded relieved to hear from me. "Linda! How are you holding up?" "Still standing," I said, forcing a smile through my voice. I was wondering if your brother-in-law might be willing to look at the property. Just to see if there's any chance it can be salvaged. Of course, he said without hesitation. He's got some free time this week. I'll have him meet you there. That call gave me something I hadn't had in weeks. Purpose. 2 days later, I met Tom and his brother-in-law Mike at the site of what used to be my home. The air still carried a faint smell of soot, but grass was already starting to grow through the blackened soil. Mike walked through carefully, taking notes, his boots crunching over the charred remains. "You're lucky the foundation's still good," he said finally. "That's the hardest part. You could rebuild on this." "Really?" I asked, my heart lifting a little. He nodded. "It won't be easy, and it'll cost a bit, but it's doable. If your insurance covers even part of it, we can work with that." I thanked M, shaking his hand. For the first time since the fire, I felt like I could breathe. But then Mike added, almost offhandedly, "You might want to check with your son, too. If you rebuild, you'll probably need some help with the down payment for materials, just until insurance reimburses you." I hesitated, my smile faltering. "Yes. I'll talk to him." The truth was, I didn't want to. Not because I was too proud, but because I already knew how that conversation would go. That evening, I called Mark. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom, I was just thinking about you," he said. His voice sounded warm, and for a moment, I almost forgot the distance between us. "I met with a contractor today," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "He thinks the house can be rebuilt." "That's great news," Mark said. "What's the estimate?" "About $40,000 to get it livable again," I replied, "but insurance might only cover $25,000. There was a pause, just a small one, but long enough for me to hear the shift in his tone when he spoke again. "That's a lot." "I know," I said gently. "I'm not asking for a handout, Mark. Maybe just a loan until things settle. I can pay you back once the insurance clears." He hesitated. "Mom, I don't know if we can do that right now. Emily and I are already stretched thin. We just put a down payment on the car, and she's been talking about starting her business." "I understand," I said quickly before he could finish. "Don't worry about it." "Mom, it's not that I don't want to help. I said it's fine," I repeated, forcing a small laugh. "I'll figure something out." But the second I hung up, my chest ached. I wasn't angry, just disappointed. Not in him exactly, but in what time and love had done to us. I sat there in that motel room staring at the peeling wallpaper and thought of Henry again. He used to say, "When a man gets married, a mother must learn to step aside, but a good son never lets her fall." I'd stepped aside, but I was still falling. A few days later, Tom stopped by again. He handed me a folder of papers. "Mike drew up a plan," he said. "It's rough, but it's something to start with." "Thank you," I said sincerely. He gave me a long look like he wanted to say more. "Linda, I heard some things," he said cautiously. "What kind of things?" "About your son's wife." I tensed, my stomach twisting. "What about her?" He hesitated. "Just that she's been telling folks you left because you didn't want to live with them. Said you were too proud to accept help." I exhaled slowly. "I see." He scratched the back of his neck. "I didn't want to repeat gossip, but I figured you'd want to know." "I appreciate it," I said quietly. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, staring out the window. Emily wasn't just trying to push me away, she was rewriting the story, making it sound like I had abandoned them, that I'd chosen pride over family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Henry's old saying, "Truth has a way of burning brighter than any lie." If she wanted to paint me as ungrateful, maybe it was time people heard my side. I didn't want revenge, but I wanted peace, and peace only comes when the truth stands bare in the light. So I took out my notebook, turned on the motel lamp, and began to write. Every detail, every conversation, every moment from the fire to now. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to be erased. I spent the next week writing, page after page. My hand cramped, my eyes burned, but I didn't stop. Every word felt like stitching up a wound, slow, painful, but necessary. I wrote about the fire, about the smell of smoke that still clung to my dreams, about sitting at that dinner table while Emily smiled her perfect smile and told me how grateful she was to have me there, about how her eyes never matched her words. I wrote it all, and as I wrote, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger anymore, it was clarity. By the end of the week, I had over 50 pages. It wasn't meant to be a story for anyone else. But somehow it felt like one, like something other women might understand. One evening, I was at the small laundromat near the motel folding my clothes when a woman next to me struck up a conversation. Her name was Carol. She was maybe in her 50s, tired eyes but kind face. "You staying at the Pinecrest too?" she asked, noticing my motel laundry bag. I nodded. "Just till I figure things out." "Same here," she said. "Divorce, 30 years married, and he found someone younger." I gave a soft laugh. "Seems we're both starting over." She smiled sadly. "Feels strange, doesn't it? Having to rebuild when you thought you'd already done all your building." That line stuck with me. Having to rebuild when you thought you'd already done all your building. We talked for nearly an hour, swapping stories, small comforts, and when she asked what had brought me there, I hesitated but then told her everything. When I mentioned my notebook, she said, "You should share it. People need to hear stories like that. Makes the rest of us feel less alone." I didn't think much of it then, but that night her words echoed in my mind. Maybe my story wasn't just mine. Maybe it was for someone else, too. A few days later, I went back to the property again. The autumn wind had picked up, and the trees around the lake were already turning gold. Mike's men had cleared some of the debris, and the place looked emptier. But it was progress. As I walked the property line, I saw something half buried in the dirt near the back fence. I bent down and brushed it off. It was my old wind chime, the one Henry had made from copper pipes when we first moved here. The metal was blackened, bent, but it still made the faintest sound when the wind touched it. That tiny sound brought me to tears. I held it to my chest and whispered, "I'm still here, Henry. I'm still fighting." I decided then that I would rebuild, even if it took years, even if I had to do it one wall at a time. That weekend, I took a bus to the local community center. They were holding a rebuilding grant information session for fire victims. There were about a dozen of us there, faces lined with exhaustion and loss. When it was my turn to speak with the coordinator, a young woman named Jasmine, I explained my situation. She flipped through my forms and nodded sympathetically. "You actually qualify for a small recovery grant," she said. "It's not much, but it's something $2,000 to start." I smiled, my eyes filling. "That's more than enough to get the first steps started. Also," she added, "we're doing a community story project. We invite survivors to share their experiences. Some even get featured in the local paper. It helps raise awareness for donations." A spark lit in me. "You mean, tell my story?" She nodded. "Exactly. Would you like to participate?" For a moment, I hesitated. My story was raw, too personal. But then I thought about Emily, about her polished version of what happened, about how she'd told people I chose to leave. "No, not this time." "Yes," I said, "I would." The day I shared my story, I was trembling. I stood in front of a small group of people in folding chairs, my notebook in my hands. At first, my voice wavered, but then I looked up and saw faces watching me, not judging, just listening. Some nodding, some crying quietly. I told them everything, the fire, the motel, the loneliness, the betrayal. And when I finished, there was silence for a moment, then applause. Afterward, people came up to hug me. One woman said, "You said everything I've been too scared to say." Another whispered, "Thank you for reminding me that starting over isn't the end." When I left that hall, I felt lighter than I had in months. The local paper printed my story 2 weeks later. It was titled, "After the Ashes, One Woman's Rebuild," and wouldn't you know, it reached more people than I could have ever imagined. That same week, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was quiet, hesitant. "Mom?" It was Mark. "I saw your story," he said. "Emily did too." I didn't respond. He continued, his voice thick. "Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't know how much you were hurting. Emily's been crying all morning. We both, well, We both said things that weren't fair. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. I didn't write it to hurt anyone, I said softly. I just needed to tell the truth. I know, he whispered. And you did. There was a long pause. Then he said, Mom, we want to help you rebuild. Please, let me do this right this time. Tears streamed down my face, but this time they weren't from sadness. All right, I said quietly, let's rebuild. Weeks later, I stood on that same patch of earth where everything had once burned. This time, there were wooden beams, fresh concrete, and the sound of hammers. My new house was rising from the ashes. And when the wind blew through the trees, I hung Henry's old wind chime on the porch beam. It rang, clear and bright. For the first time, I didn't feel like I'd lost everything. I felt like I'd finally come home. You know, when the flames took my home, I thought they'd taken me too. But sometimes, life burns things down not to destroy you, but to clear a space for something new to grow. If I've learned anything through all of this, it's that help doesn't always come from the people you expect. Sometimes it comes from strangers at a laundromat, or from a quiet moment when you finally decide to speak your truth. I don't hate my son. I don't even hate Emily anymore. I think they were scared of responsibility, of guilt, of what my brokenness reminded them of. We all run from pain in our own ways. But healing happens when you stop running. Now, when I sit on my new porch and hear Henry's old wind chime sing in the breeze, I smile. The sound isn't sad anymore, it's just peaceful. And I've realized that home isn't always a house with four walls. Sometimes it's the quiet strength inside you that refuses to give up no matter how many times life tries to turn you to ash. Would you have forgiven them like I did? Tell me in the comments. And if you're still standing in the ashes of something you've lost, take heart, my friend. You can rebuild one brick, one breath, one new beginning at a time.